The newer members will enjoy making your acquaintance, Kathy. If it's okay if I go ahead and refer to you as Kathy. And I know that the older members are thrilled to have you back. Kathy has presented many, many wonderful sermons here in the past, including a whole series on mythology, which is one of her major interests. Kathy is a linguist. She has taught English and humanities for many years at Mesa Community College. She retired this past May and tells me she's still adjusting somewhat to her new status. Her husband Alan is retired as well, and he was a math teacher at MCC. She has 2 sons, and this morning her presentation is entitled Writing and Being.
Thank you, Monica. One of my new things, and it's a long story, don't ask me, I never thought I would be doing this, but I'm actually taking a course in studio recording, so you never move a room without loosening the knot. You're going to strip this one. Recording control room etiquette. Once around the boom, once around the stand. Otherwise you get fired. Somewhat broke the mood, I'm sorry, but it was bugging me the whole time. Pull the mic down here. Is that better? Wait a minute. Polar pattern? Yep. Okay. I should know the model, but I don't. Anyway, I was really overjoyed to be asked to return here. I always love coming, and especially as part of my sort of new phase after retiring, to be asked to think about religion, which, as you know from my previous presentations, is sort of, to me, a subset of mythology, and literature. And I thought, my gosh, they have to break those 2 topics down just to make college majors. What can I possibly say in a few minutes? So first, my apologies for sort of really skimming the surface, breaking this into something more personal to me, because when I thought about it, and I want to recognize Lou, you should be up here, Lou, you're quite a writer. I enjoyed reading your stuff so much. We're all writers, and I titled this Writing and Being in homage to another retired professor at ASU, Dr. Lynn G. Nelson, who taught a course and wrote a book by that name, who said everybody publishes, we all publish one way or another, and who spent a large part of his career helping young people who were publishing in the form of vandalism and violence turn it into literature. I thought about how religion, religio, means to link, to relink, to rejoin, and how writing links us back to ourselves and links us to community. And I noticed one of the marvelous quotes on the back of the Order of Service speaks to that effect. I think it was Lord Byron about writing letters. And I thought about all the controversy about literature, what's in and what's out, what's in the canon, and I thought, oh, what a neat pun, canon, religion, literature, lots of things came and went to my mind, but this is what I came up with, and I hope maybe you will enjoy it. As you said, many marvelous presentations. No, many presentations, maybe some of them, I don't know, but maybe this will come up with one of those. And again, my apologies. I am stepping outside of my box. Last night I was at a ceremony to burn journals. Yes, and there's a reason for that, I know. It was tearful, but it was joyful. I'm much lighter now. And I didn't burn all of them, though. I hit a few pages. But as part of my new phase of life, I wanted to include some of my own writing in here. So I don't pretend to rank in the ranks of literature, but it's in the idea of showing what Lynn's work meant to me when I took his classes, and how we can all use literature and turn it back. So, okay. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is the opening sentence of the Gospel of John. In its original Greek, the term used for English word was logos, from which we derive our word logic. Logos signified words that helped create and sustain order in our everyday world, a reflection of the primal order God created at the beginning of time, when he said with words in Genesis, "Let there be light," and when he named the light day and the darkness night. From this we can see the importance to Western religion, at least, of language, and the importance of its daughter, literature, in this tradition. But the Greeks had another word for word, mythos, from which we derive our word myth. While today many people mistakenly believe that the word myth means falsehood, to the ancient Greeks it meant deeper or hidden meaning or truth, that which is paradoxical and apart from logic. It was only used to refer to sacred stories or to utterances by prophets or prophetesses. In myths, we have our first literature. In myths, we find the building blocks of literature, which are a narrative structure consisting of events that are inextricably intertwined with complex characters whose lives are involved in exploring universal human concerns. Myths and their daughters, literary fiction, poetry, and drama, ask and explore possible answers to questions like, where did the world come from? Where did we come from? How are we to live? What do we owe to ourselves and to others? Where are we going? How will it end, and what comes afterwards? And why? In considering religion and literature, we must first consider literature's unique relationship to religion compared to the other arts. Although our religious lives would certainly be impoverished if there were no religious painting, sculpture, architecture, or music, these are additions to religion. Literature is the foundation of religion. Without texts, none of what Karen Armstrong calls the axial religions, those that began between roughly 500 BCE and 600 CE, those which today form the world's great religions, would exist. All of them, without exception, depend upon one or more central texts that recount the life of their founder and his teachings, the histories of rituals, holy days and places, or the prayers and psalms used in practices. Consider first the Western religious texts. The Old Testament is a compendium of Jewish folk tales, history, poetry, and law that is so sacred that each and every Torah must be copied by hand, and if one mistake is made, it must be burned and a new one begun. The New Testament is a collection of biographies of Jesus, along with his teachings, as well as letters purported to have been written by St. Paul, which contain rules for Christians to live by. Islam is based upon the Quran, which is claimed to have been dictated to Muhammad by Allah, and is considered so holy that not one word can ever be changed or translated. Its companion, the Hadith, contains more sayings and deeds of the Prophet and forms the basis of Sharia law. And the Eastern religious tradition is just as rich in literature. From Hinduism comes the Rig Veda, the basis of Hindu belief, the Ramayana, and the Bhagavad Gita, two epic tales that grapple with great moral dilemmas. Buddhism is based upon many sutras, such as the Pali Canon, which recount the life and sayings of Buddha and of the many bodhisattvas. The Analects of Confucius have set the foundation of Chinese social order and personal virtue for over 2,000 years, while the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu describes the dualistic worldview of yin and yang and the doctrine of Wu Wei, or doing nothing, as a means to inner peace and outer harmony. All of these texts are the main, if not the only way we learn about our religions. They help us to see the world in new ways and to imagine other worlds as well. But the way in which they do so reveals yet another trait that separates literature from the other arts. While anyone who can see can appreciate and understand, if only a little, what is being communicated by a piece of visual art, or he who can hear a piece of music. In order to understand literature, one must be literate in the language in which the text is written. Otherwise, we can get nothing from it. What this means is that literature as it is received by us is always situated within a language, which is to say within a specific time, place, and cultural outlook. These all change over time, so that we inevitably drift away from the world the writers and readers of our sacred texts. It takes scholarship to help us understand these texts ever more deeply, and their ultimate foundation in their time and place will forever remain out of our complete reach and understanding. And this is, in essence, the problem also faced by great literature. Anyone who has ever read or listened to a Shakespeare play can attest to the drift in language and reference in a mere 400 years, leaving us to imagine the shifts between the Hebrew of 3,000 years ago and today's English. But both great literature and great religious texts still compel our attention because they deal with those same questions I mentioned earlier. For example, consider two great stories: the life of Jesus, as told in the New Testament, and the life of Hamlet, as told by Shakespeare. I suppose we could sum up both these tales as being about two young men with father issues. But if we did, we would be missing the many deep reflections on existence and morality they offer. Both men are involved in a dilemma. They feel commanded to do something to correct what they see as immorality and corruption in their societies. Hamlet has been told by the ghost of his father that he had been murdered by the current king and needs to be avenged. Throughout the play, Hamlet considers human predicaments such as the morality of murder and suicide, the nature of true love, and to what lengths we should go to honor it, what happens to us after we die, and how that should affect the way we live. These are also among the issues considered in the Jesus story, although sometimes with different conclusions. And each story transfixes us in the same way. We watch as another human being suffers through their life, and we are moved by what Aristotle said are the two most humanizing emotions, pity and terror. Both stories force us to ponder our own morality and grapple with our own questions and answers to life. This communication of mind to mind and heart to heart is nowhere in art as direct as through literature, for literature invades our thoughts and invites us to imagine for ourselves these things. But there's another side to literature, and Hamlet gives us the clue. When asked by Polonius, "What is the matter?" meaning what was Hamlet reading in the book that he held, Hamlet answered him literally by replying, "Words, words, words." Although he meant this to mock Polonius, it is nonetheless true that all literature, sacred or secular, comes down to words, words, words. And here is where the average person can use not just the consumption of literature for spiritual growth, but the production of it as well. For unlike musical composition, architecture, or the visual arts, which require specialized training and materials, any literate person can write, if only for themselves, in a journal. For this reason, perhaps, every major religion has at least one use of writing as a spiritual practice. Most notably, Chinese and Japanese Taoists, Confucianists, and Buddhists use poetry as a means to achieve and help others achieve moments of insight. Their words, being characters, approach the visual art, and we should all be familiar with the lovely paintings of which these characters often form an integral part. We in the U.S. are probably most familiar with the Zen koan, or the haiku poem, but there are many other forms as well, many of them used by monks for meditation. Hasidic Judaism has forms of ecstatic poetry, as does Islam, of which the Persian poet Rumi is probably the best known and most popular right now in the West. The Christian book of Revelation springs from a form of ecstatic writing commonly practiced in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, and there are also the poems, prayers, and songs of the saints, such as St. Francis of Assisi and Hildegard von Bingen. For myself, I have always turned to writing since I was a child to clarify my thoughts, vent my feelings, and simply to revel in the feel and sound of words. I have been most fortunate in my life to have come across several methods of using writing, both to aid my spiritual growth and my growth as a writer. I'd like to share a few of them with you. First is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. The bedrock of her method to free the inner spirit is called morning pages. It's simple, if not always easy. You just keep a notebook by your bed, and upon awakening, you free write 3 pages. That means you write 3 pages without stopping or lifting your pen from the paper. No editing, no thinking what to say, no fixing mistakes. There are no mistakes, just you meeting yourself as you emerge from the dream state. The result is often disjointed writing about banal or petty concerns. This is the burning ritual. But this can also turn suddenly and unexpectedly into inspired disjointedness, in which you make connections that surprise you. Connections about your life, about your feelings, about existence. And though originally Cameron said never to reread these pages, just throw them away, and this was the ritual, she now acknowledges that there are gems to be found and polished into writing for others to read and hear. For we have a choice. We write first, always, for ourselves, as Alice Walker's quote reveals. And we choose then what to turn out to others, to share. The second method is called Writing and Being, the name of both a course and a book by Dr. Lynn G. Nelson, Professor Emeritus at ASU. I was lucky enough to take his course twice, in which a group of strangers came together in total mutual support of revelation, confession, and growth through writing. At each meeting, Lynn would introduce us either to a spiritual practice or a piece of literature. Then we would write, reflect, write some more, and come together again to share what we had written. I have never had a deeper, truer, more human and sacred educational experience. So I'd like to conclude by sharing with you a couple of poems that I produced in his class, and I'll trace for you the method by which these came about. The first is a prose poem. If you're not familiar with a prose poem, it looks like a paragraph. So it doesn't have stanzas, it doesn't look like a poem, it doesn't rhyme, but its concerns and its use of language are what makes it poetry. It's sort of in the middle. This was occasioned by the reading of a very short novel called Flatland. Has anyone read Flatland? Yeah. The story of a place that exists in only 2 dimensions, and what happens as they encounter 3-dimensional objects, such as spheres, that come through their plane of existence, which appear out of nowhere as a point that grows and then disappears. Can you imagine that? Yeah. Flatland poses the question, what would a 3rd dimension look like to the inhabitants of a 2-dimensional world? Which is a small version of the larger question, how do we deal with things we don't know? Like God, perhaps? The second inspiration for the poem that I eventually produced in his class was this prose poem, The Kermesse, or The Dance, by William Carlos Williams, one of my favorite poets, whose breathless and rollicking sentence style I attempted to imitate. So first I'd like to read you some good stuff. This is William Carlos Williams, The Dance. It was inspired by a process called ekphrosis, which is an artist in one medium being inspired by art in another. He was looking at a painting called The Kermesse, which is the name of a medieval peasant dance by William Bruegel the Elder. And it is a rollicking picture. There are people everywhere, and they're dancing in a big long chain, and people are drinking and eating and all that stuff. So he tried to do that in this prose poem, and I was just enchanted by this because, again, religio, linking this world of the senses. By getting further into the material world we're in, we emerge, like the sphere through Flatland, suddenly into spirituality. All right? So here it is. In Bruegel's great picture, The Kermesse, the dancers go round. They go round and around, the squeal and the blare and the tweedle of bagpipes, a bugle and fiddles tipping their bellies round as the thick-sided glasses whose wash they impound, their hips and their bellies off balance to turn them, kicking and rolling about the fair ground, swinging their butts, those shanks must be sound to bear up under such rollicking measures, prance as they dance in Bruegel's great picture. thinking about the theme of flatlands, of what we don't know, and trying to get that breathless quality of prose, led me to write a prose poem of my own called Suppose. Suppose this is you, and suppose this is the world you live in, the world you're coming from. And just suppose you are suspended in it, somewhere between 2 and 3, between action and inaction, between male and female, between black and white, between land and sea. And suppose that you are lost, and the land and the water are confusing to you, that you never know when you're on one or the other, or where they might lead, or if they might end or not. Who would you be? And next suppose that up ahead is something you're moving toward, something of formness, incomprehensible to you, but irresistible, ever-changing, shifting from black to white, moon to sun, night to day, trading its quarters endlessly, ceaselessly, drawing you on. Would that thing be rising or setting? Finally, suppose you are on your way over this landscape, that you yourself are 2 and 3, and becoming 4, becoming aware of your becoming, sensing rather than seeing the absolute in this world, this landscape, this icon, that your action is in action, your birth a death, your death approaching birth. Would this be life? I would like to conclude with a second poem and its inspiration. This I wrote as a response to 3 different poems that I read in Lynn's class. The first one is by a poet that I'm always surprised that few people know about. I know about him because I sing in choirs and choruses, and one of his poems, he only wrote 2, very long though. One of them was set to music, and I went on to read the others. His name is Christopher Smart, and he lived in the 18th century. He was a friend of Ben Jonson's. His father confined him to an insane asylum for most of his life because he suffered from religious mania. Okay? I like this because I think his poetry shows the difficulty, if not the futility, of trying to parse genius and madness, or of trying to define the difference between prose and poetry, between secular and sacred, between logos and mythos, in words. It is, as I said, very long. He had a lot of time on his hands. So it's a very long poem. But this part is from part B of the poem, and it's my favorite because I'm a cat lover. And because it takes something extremely mundane and focuses on it intently, and you can visualize it. I think everyone would. We've all seen cats. And because he's using biblical cadences, it builds up a spiritual feeling. See if you agree. For I will consider my cat, Geoffrey, for he is a servant of the living God, duly and daily serving him. For at the first glance of the glory of God in the east he worships in his way. For this is done by wreathing his body 7 times round with elegant quickness. For then he leaps up to catch the musk, which is the blessing of God upon his prayer. For he rolls upon prank to work it in. For having done duty and received blessing, he begins to consider himself. For this he performs in 10 degrees. For first, he looks upon his forepaws to see if they are clean. For secondly, he kicks up behind to clear away there. For thirdly, he works it upon stretch with the forepaws extended. For fourthly, he sharpens his paws by wood. For fifthly, he washes himself. For sixthly, he rolls upon wash. For seventhly, he flees himself, that he may not be interrupted upon the beat. For eighthly, he rubs himself against a post. For ninthly, he looks up for his instructions. For 10thly, he goes in quest of food. For having considered God and himself, he will consider his neighbors. For if he meets another cat, he will kiss her in kindness. For when he takes his prey, he plays with it to give it a chance. For 1 mouse in 7 escapes by his dallying. For when his day's work is done, his business more properly begins, for he keeps the Lord's watch in the night against the adversary. Smart's poem got me thinking about the divine in the everyday, the mythos and the logos. And I found that it went along with a Zen poem by the poet Dogen. Those who see worldly life as an obstacle to Dharma see no Dharma in everyday actions. They have not yet discovered that there are no everyday actions outside of Dharma. The last line of that poem, "There are no everyday actions outside of Dharma," coincided in my mind with the last line of a Sufi Islamic poem. God is always as close as your jugular vein. This line brought home to me the idea of how God, as well as we ourselves, is a verb, not a noun. How God, the Buddha, the divine force, whatever, is not a static thing that we can contemplate once and for all, but a being, a presence that must be lived, experienced anew at every moment. Trying to hang on to this idea led me to write the following poem, with which I will conclude. It's called "You Could As Easily Be." You could as easily be standing in your driveway as on a beach, sitting at your desk as on a mountaintop. When you notice you are breathing, you feel your gut move, your throat pulse behind your eyes, and you realize, you say, I now am here, alive. You could as easily wonder at this point about meanings, purposes, recalling stories you once believed would explain all the prayers you committed to memory. You reach upward to make a gesture of magic in the air. You could as easily be dead, as alive. Only 15 or so seconds of stillness joins you to all stillness. You grope for words to chase that thought away. You could as easily shake your shoulders to rid you of awareness of inevitability. Go on, you tell yourself, this surely will not come to me, surely to someone I must mean. But instead, you recall an hour when the sun shone on the grass, when the scent of wind in a new season woke your soul, when you looked at the small motion everywhere, seeing how serious it really is when everything beautiful breathes together. Instead, you remember not what it means, but how it is. Nature doesn't play, she works. The butterfly from each flower takes life, and lovely birds eat butterflies and count this a blessing, and you're no different. Every breath's a robbery, every death's a gift. You could as easily do something else, change your life, make it mean, learn to pray. But instead, you relax the corners of your mouth and eyes, go back to what you were doing, because praying's what you've been doing all along.
Thank you so much. It's very inspirational as well as thought-provoking. Please join me now for our last hymn. Hymn number 34, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. Please stand as you're willing and able.
Thank you.
As I extinguish the chalice, please join me in the unison reading of the covenant. It is in your order of service. Oops. Oh, I mean mission statement, excuse me. Okay. We agree to provide a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for our lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual searches. In closing, I would like to thank Kathy Sheffield again for her wonderful and inspiring message. I would like to say thank you to our greeters, and I have listed Joy Bowen and Julie Tennant, but I think it was Elizabeth. Elizabeth and Julie. Thank you to our musician, Joe Cleland, and I was going to thank Mitch for recording the service, but is he here? Thank you, Mitch. Thank you. Wonderful to know that it was recorded. In closing, I'd like to quote some words by Paul H. LaRue. We give thanks for this day and for the people who have enriched our lives. We give thanks for the love which created us and links us in struggle and joy. We give thanks for the spirit of creativity that inspires and encourages us. It brings novelty in the midst of familiarity, risk in the midst of comfort, and surprise in the midst of the commonplace. Please remain seated now for the postlude.
Well,